Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the R&D session number 7. So this session is going to be dedicated to buildings and energy efficiency in buildings. I just wanted to show you this is the 7th session, and we have had already very interesting sessions where we presented a new R&D center, which is a research and development center from EDP Group. We have had sessions about smart cities, robotics, and renewable energies, flexibility. So we have these sessions every 2 weeks. And the next session will be the 11th of November, and we'll discuss smart cities and projects about smart grids. Projects about smart grids. And so I will present just the session of today's session is going to be presented in 2 parts. First part, we are going to present the AmBIENCe project, which is an European R&D project where NEW participates, and we'll have several guests presenting the project. And in the second part, we'll have a roundtable with also some guests to discuss more broadly the energy efficiency in buildings, energy performance contracts, and what's being done throughout Europe. So without any further ado, I give the floor to José Miguel Costa, who will present the session a little bit and present most of all the positive energy communities area of new R&D. José.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by sharing Alex's words and to give you all a warm welcome to our R&D session number 7. On a very brief introductory note, I will present the positive energy communities area, and I will ask my colleague Ricardo to pass the slide, please. And another one. That's it. Thank you. So the steering goal of PEX area is to be at the forefront of all the energy-related innovation that is emerging inside these very rich ecosystems that are held by smart cities and communities. Within this area, our work is guided by 4 cornerstones, as you can see here, being energy communities, smart cities, electrical mobility, and energy efficient buildings. These linkable building blocks of the area are reflected in 5 ongoing H2020 projects that we currently have and that you can see on your right. Very quickly, sharing Sparks and Positive are smart cities projects, touching a lot with teams of energy communities and the electrical mobility. SAT and the star of the evening, AmBIENCe, are related with buildings. And with that, I give the word to my good colleague, Ricardo Ramos, which is EDP New Project Manager for AmBIENCe. Thank you.
Thank you, José. So AmBIENCe stands for Active Managed Buildings with Energy Performance Contracting. Giving a project overview, key facts. It started in June 2019 with a duration of 2.5 years, overall budget of 2 million, EDP budget 277,000 euros, local partners EDP New, us, and EDP Comercial. In Portugal, we have also Inesctec, a partner from Spain, IQ4. In Italy, we have Enea. And from Belgium, we have BPIE, it means Buildings Performance Institute of Europe, and we have Vito as the coordinator and Energy Invest. Giving some context, European Commission wants for 2030 to cut off 40% of greenhouse gas emissions and improve 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency. But the problem here is that most of Europeans' building stock, 75%, still remains inefficient. And buildings account for a lot of energy consumption in Europe, 40%, and 36% of CO2 emissions. So what Europe needs to do? Improve energy performance of existing buildings, namely in building renovations, with the traditional measures that you had that substitute, like the HVAC, renovate your building envelope to be more thermically efficient. You can also substitute lighting for LED, but in AmBIENCE we focus more in the option B, smart building upgrades, and these accounts to make the building smarter with sensors, ICT equipment. These are more low cost when compared to traditional efficiency measures and can also have high impact solutions. So in AmBIENCE, we are looking for an active building EPC, different from the traditional EPC energy performance contracts that is usually done. So presenting this new concept. On one hand, we have the traditional EPC, where an ESCO invests in these energy efficiency measures that I talk about, and the savings are then shared between the client and the ESCO. In this active building EPC, we want to have more value streams than we usually have, with flexibility and adaptability in order to have more value streams in our EPC. Also, apart from this is the demand response is the first dimension of AmBIENCE, but we have other dimensions, like to have a broader scope of building types, including also residential, and also extend to a cluster of buildings to energy communities. Talking about AmBIENCE goals, it's to extend the EPC concept to include demand response, as I talked about, and also make this to a broader range of buildings. But also we want to develop a tool that supports the forecast of demand response value stream in EPC contracting phase. This tool would facilitate the implementation of EPC, making it more automatic. Also, validate the concept, tool, and measurement and verification methodology through two pilots, real pilots, one in Portugal, one in Belgium, and the one in Portugal, it will be in EDP building in Porto. Also, engage with all relevant actors and stakeholders groups, from building managers to ESCOs, policymakers, and financial institutions, to remove barriers and ensure applicability. So our vision and mission in AmBIENCE, I've given the context that we have a lot of energy consumption from buildings, also a lot of emissions, and also a lot of people's time is spent indoors. So we have here also an opportunity that buildings are becoming more digital, smarter, and with this we can somehow take this opportunity to reduce emissions. With sensors, we can decide in which times it's better to consume, because there's more green energy available in the grid, or local green energy. So we want to reduce emissions. We are not so focused in energy efficiency. We don't mind to consume more if it's green energy, if it's in the appropriate times. So we want to do this by combining electrification with active control. So our mission is that to improve economic attractiveness of EPCs by extending their concept from traditional EPC to active EPC, and develop a tool to help on EPC contracting. Who will benefit? First of all, the environment with less greenhouse gas emissions, the consumers with more energy cost savings, but also energy stakeholders, energy system stakeholders like the DSO and TSO, because they can have a better integration of variable renewable energy, and also there are more business opportunities for ESCOs. What's in it for EDP? EDP's role is the leader in the demonstration activities with a pilot in EDP Porto building, leads impact assessment of active control, and leads exploitation plan activities. The key outputs that we want to take for EDP's business unit is the development of new business models related to EPC, assessment of active EPC impact, the real impact, and also it will implement a smarter operation in one of its buildings. I'll now give floor to my colleague, Ricardo Santos. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Santos, and I work at EDP New. I hope everyone is okay with the COVID situation. Everyone is okay at home. Now I'll talk a little bit about the state of EPCs across Europe. This is a task which we had to develop inside the AmBIENCe project. So to recapitulate a little bit, the structure of an Horizon Europe project. We have the calls for the project. We build a consortium, and then we apply for the call in question, the call we're considering with the project we've built inside the consortium. If we win the call, we'll develop the project, which has several work packages which are structured with several tasks. This European EPC market survey is basically the first deliverable from work package 1 from AmBIENCe. So in this market survey, we try to understand as a beginning point for the project, how is the European market in terms of active EPC built? What's the state of the market? What are the policies and directives already applied on different countries? In our case, we focused on Italy, Belgium, Portugal, and Spain. And we will use this work to build our future work. What does this mean? This means that we will look at the market, look at this state, and then we try to build possible business models that will add value to these markets. And finally, we'll go to the pilots and the later stages of the project, which consists on assessing the pilots, measuring their performance, and see how and see the results of our projected work. This is mainly, these are the countries we're evaluating, and we try to look at the whole value chain of the different countries, of the markets on the different countries. We go from the consumer to the supplier of the active EPC projects. It's important to understand that there are EPCs. In this presentation, we mainly look at EPCs, which are energy performance contracts. But our goal here in this project is to build an active EPC. This means it's an active energy performance contract. It's a performance contract that you actively manage, which has the classical energy efficiency measures, and the more innovative ones like demand response, which is not that new, but it's not still widely commercial available. On the next slide, we look at Italy. Italy is a special case, as we'll see in the end of the presentation, since it's kind of advanced in these contracts. They already have a very thorough legislation, which is the legislative decree 102/14, which already kind of catapults these types of products in the markets, which typically are sold by the ESCOs, to a new level. Overall, the market in 2018 for the ESCO was for EPCs was about 3.7 billion euros. If we look at the graph in the slide, we can see that in 2018 the whole energy efficiency services market was about 8 billion. So this is almost 50% of the market for EPCs. And they're also quite diverse in terms of the contracts that they offer. Because as we'll see forward, the main contracts are shared savings contracts and guaranteed savings contracts. But in Italy, they have 7 types of contracts. They have first out, first in, these 2 that I talked about, first step, chauffeurs, and plus energy service contract. If you want to explore further on these contracts, I won't elongate on it here. You can see the links that are on the slides that point towards the deliverable on AmBIENCe's project website. Well, the main players on the Italy market are the supplier, the beneficiary, the financier, and the EPC facilitators. This is kind of standard in all the markets. On next slide, we see here Belgium, which has a kind of a similar structure in terms of market players. You sometimes vary some of the players. You have a more divided structure for the players, but typically the 4 pillars are the ones that I said before. In Belgium, the main EPC projects are on the public sector. They also have some projects on the private sector, which are mediated through ESCOs, through direct sales from the ESCOs, kind of similar to what EDP Commercial and other ESCOs do here in Portugal. In terms of regulation, they mainly transpose. This is kind of standard for all the countries. They transpose the EU directives to local and regional legislation that propels the creation of products and services to the customers through the whole value chain. Well, and there's a particularity to Belgium, which is their EPC market is 95% composed of guaranteed savings approach. It is what it is. It's kind of the customer wants to have a guarantee that they'll have their savings at the end of the contract, and if that does not happen, the player, typically an ESCO, will take the penalty for the savings not delivered. So the customer always gets their savings. On the graphic on the slide, we can see that the number of buildings under EPC contract has gone from near zero in 2014 to near 300 in 2018. So it's quite a rise. On the next slide, we analyze a little bit Portugal. The market in Portugal, we can say that it's still a bit a laggard. We're still catching up to the rest of Europe. And this is kind of interesting since buildings are the third major energy consumption sector, with around 30% of the share of energy consumed on our country, and this is mainly due to the households. So in terms of the policies and directives that enhance the production of these services, we have several programs, being PPC, probably the most widely known in EDP and the Portuguese energy sector, since it's one of the main tools of financing projects and products on the energy sector in terms of energy efficiency. On the graph, we can see a little bit of the transition that's happening in terms of smart metering installation. This basically means that we're transitioning from the usage of standard smart meters to use intelligent smart meters, of standard meters to use smart meters, intelligent smart meters that communicate the measurements and other types of quantities automatically. Yeah. On the next slide, we see the case of Spain, which is kind of similar to Portugal. In Portugal, we also have, like in Spain, the market players, which are the clients, the suppliers, decision makers, EPC providers, and the facilitators, which typically are ESCOs that do this work. They aggregate the services and sell them to the clients. And in terms of financing, this can typically, it is done through the ESCO, with the ESCO being backed by a financial institution. So finally, on the next slide, we look at the status of EPCs. As we have already commented, Italy is in the front of the run. This is the conclusion of the survey we did to ESCOs, to suppliers, to facilitators, basically to the market players. And we concluded that Italy is on the front in terms of legislation and environment for the development of projects and products and services. Spain and Belgium come next, and Portugal, as I said before, is a laggard still. Finally, on the next slide, we look at the road forward. So presently we have an EPC active EPC market and also an EPC market which is quite in its infancy. We think that it can quietly enhance the 2050 EU's goals for the decarbonization. Doing what? Creating new business opportunities and enhancing the growth of energy efficiency. The main challenges here, I think, are the transposition of European directives, which is not straightforward since it is unique to each country and to each electricity market structure. And finally, educate the client on the benefits of EPCs and how they will boost energy efficiency and bring savings to their wallets. Yeah, and this was the conclusions that we've got from our survey. Now I pass the floor to Chris Kyer.
Thank you, Ricardo. I will share my screen. So if all is well, you should now see my presentation full screen. Is that correct? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So you see my screen in presentation mode?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. Thank you. So great. Thank you for inviting me to present the AmBIENCe project and the active building EPC concept in this R&D session on building and energy performance. I think it's the right topic for the project. So yeah, let's just start with the presentation itself. So I think it was already said that yeah, I think we're well aware of the European ambitions that are both high but also needed to reduce emission targets. We're also well aware of the role that buildings have to play there because they are responsible for a large portion of the consumption and the emissions. And yeah, therefore we have the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that sets targets. The last years, actually, the focus has been mainly on reducing building emissions by making them less energy hungry and reducing their energy needs, energy consumption. Yeah, that's the well-known, I think, energy efficiency first credo. And related to that, the energy performance labeling and certificates were introduced, and yeah, these were associated with improvement targets. To put the challenge in perspective, I think also that was already said, about 75% of the building stock is really very inefficient in Europe. The rate at which such inefficient buildings are replaced by new energy efficient buildings, really new buildings, it's low, it's about 1% per year. And then the renovation rate of, say, energy inefficient buildings is also equally low, it's also around 1%, yeah. So it's clear that a lot must happen to reach the emission targets. Studies have indicated that to reach the energy performance for buildings targets, the rate of the so-called deep energy renovations across the member states should reach about 3% per year for a minimum. And if we look at what has been achieved the last couple of years, it was more like 0.15%, so 20 times less. And of course, every year that we are lagging behind, this gap between what we should do and what we are doing becomes larger. One of the reasons for this very low amount of these deep renovations is that they typically require very high investments, and associated with that, they come with payback times that are very long. And typically, it's 40 years and can amount to much longer times already. Yeah, so it's really a problem. I think there was a nice analysis of that in the City Invest project a couple of years ago. where they analyze the average investment per square meter that is needed to achieve a certain level of energy reduction. Yeah, of course, these are average numbers, but as you can see from the graph, yeah, as your targets become more ambitious, yeah, so as you want to reduce more, the associated investment cost increases, yeah, almost exponential, I would say, because you need combinations of multiple measures, you need more complex and more expensive measures to reach that target. Yeah. So this investment barrier, we think very clearly, is one of the explanations why we're lagging behind so much. Now, energy performance relates not just to energy consumption, but it also relates to energy cost and to the emissions that are associated by the energy consumption. And it's very crucial to realize that the key goal is to reduce emissions. Reducing consumption is obviously one way to reduce emissions. And it's an important way, but it's not the only way. You can also reduce emissions by electrifying, for instance, your heating and transport. And by leveraging this combined effect of the high efficiencies of heat pumps on the one hand and the low compared to gas carbon intensity of electricity, that's, by the way, dropping further year after year, you can achieve a lot. Yeah. For, let's say, producing 1 kilowatt-hour of heat, you can do it with much less emissions if you would electrify. And if you would combine then this electrified heating further with locally produced renewable energy, I think the story becomes even better. It's for that reason that we came up with the active building EPC concept, and that we propose to focus primarily on electrification in combination with local renewable generation as a prime action to reduce emissions in a significant and affordable manner. And of course, combine this with energy efficiency measures, with, let's say, envelope measures, but do that in a very tailored manner and a less invasive manner. Yeah? So do that not to bring down your emissions, but do that to make the electrification a meaningful action to do. For instance, to make it possible to switch to low temperature heating. This way, it's possible to achieve the same emission reduction target for a much lower investment and actual cost, or on the other hand, to achieve a much higher emission reduction for the same investment or annual cost. And the graph at the right, I think, that we created from the City Invest project illustrates it in a very nice manner. The orange dots that you see there represent the annual costs that are associated with a focus on envelope-only measures. Yeah? So focusing, say, exclusively on taking envelope measures to bring down the energy demand of the building, whereas the blue dots represent the annual costs for a case where we focus on electrification and combine that with more limited, less invasive energy efficiency measures. Yeah. When I talk about annual costs here, I refer to basically the energy cost and the investment financing costs, so the combination of these two. Yeah. But this kind of illustrates the basic idea here to focus on electrification with tailored energy efficiency measures as to say the core idea behind the active building EPC concept. Of course, if you have less energy consumption reduction because you take less invasive energy efficiency measures, and you switch from gas to electricity, which is typically more expensive, and this increase in cost is not always compensated by the higher efficiency of the heat pumps, it is clear that because of the electrification, you can expect smaller energy cost reduction than if you would have, say, stayed with gas, and basically a higher remaining energy cost. The important point is that by the combination that we make, this higher energy cost compared with the not active building EPC is compensated by lower investments and financing costs, so that overall it is a more, let's say, positive business case. Besides, and that's kind of the bridge to the active building, with electrification, there also comes an opportunity to further save costs by actively controlling flexibility and specifically align consumption with moments when prices are low or the emissions are low. Yeah? So the so-called demand response actions. It is true that currently in many countries there are not yet very strong incentives for such demand response, say, control actions. But we do see this is changing very rapidly, and it will accelerate in the near future. For instance, by changes in tariff structures where they step away from net metering and distinguish between feed-in tariffs or injection tariffs and consumption tariffs, or by the introduction by dynamic prices, which is mandatory now for member states to implement, or by capacity tariffs. So there will be much more cases for demand response. And this means when you consume will become much more important than how much you consume in the big scheme of things. And yeah, of course, these additional savings or potential incomes from offering services from demand response could further improve the annual costs and make the active building EPC business case even more say, attractive. What we are explicitly not saying is that energy efficiency is not important. I mean, it still is. In the end, you want to reduce your consumption as well, because if you look at it after the investment financing is over, the energy cost is basically the only thing that counts. And as explained before, by the electrification and by not so much reducing your energy consumption, this means your energy costs will be much higher, and probably you want to get rid of that as well. So therefore, we think, but that's still basically being discussed, that in this active building EPC concept, a second phase could be added, where after the financing of the first phase, a second phase starts that focuses then on the improvement of energy efficiency. And for this, the money that was saved, let's say, by having a lower annual cost during the phase one, could be used, for instance, to not have too strong barriers. I think I need to speed up a bit here. So the active building EPC process and tools, they're basically three key processes. We have a contracting process, an operation and monitoring process, and a performance and guarantee verification process. For the contracting process, we developed the active building energy performance modeling tool, the AmBIENCe tool. This contains functionality to create flexibility models from considered design options. Think here about envelope and other measures, technological parameters, dimensions, and things like that. These flex models are then combined with selected scenarios to determine an optimal control strategy, and from this to calculate energy cost cash flows. So that's where the active control for demand response come into play. And these energy cost cash flows then are imported in the financial and economic KPI calculation tool that also incorporates specific EPC project options like duration and whether it's guaranteed savings or not, and these type of things. This way, it's able to analyze multiple design and scenarios and project options and compare, and then make the decision about what would be the best thing to do. In the operation and monitoring phase, an actual BAMS is doing the active control, and the resulting performance is obviously monitored. And in the operation and monitoring phase, then, in the performance guarantee verification phase, then, the actual measured performance is compared with the predicted guaranteed performance, where the actual performance is somehow rescaled or recalibrated using specific parameters and processes in line with the, I think, well-known IPMP-VP process. To quantify the impact of the selected measures, technologies, and dimensions for a given scenario, including also explicitly the valorization of demand response, a scenario-based model-driven optimization is done. We determine this way the optimizations for demand response by using a multiple predictive control optimization process, although if required, a more simpler variant using a more simple rule-based control can be used as well. And it's a very modular and flexible approach that makes it easy and possible to, in a very fast manner, analyze the impact of many relevant design options and scenarios like building parameters, storage sizes, loss factors, efficiencies of equipment, and so on. This picture then illustrates the modularity and the configurability of this multi-energy framework that we use for multi-objective optimization. And as you can see, it's kind of a Lego style thing where it's very easy to plug in various sources of generation, consumption, flexibility, storage conversion options, and connect them to the different energy carriers to very rapidly play with different design options. This slide is just a small illustration of the results that we obtain using the optimization framework. In this example, we started from a renovated building, so not yet electrified, where you can see what the baseline consumption of gas and electricity and the associated energy cost was. We then wanted to analyze how the energy cost would change for a future tariff structure. That's also depicted there, so no more net metering. And combining this with the design options to electrify and to add PV. And then you also wanted to specifically analyze what the impact would be of doing active demand response control in such a scenario. And we wanted to analyze that for different sizes of space heating buffers and hot sanitary, to try to see if you could find an optimal, let's say, dimension of these tanks. I think you can see the results for yourself. So you can very easily compare different options and scenarios in this case. And next to energy cost, we could do the same analysis, focusing on not different dimensions of tanks, but different loss models, efficiencies of heat pumps, more or less PV, and things like that. This is basically the same, but focusing here on the impact of on-grid injections. So the effect of having more self-consumption. And to conclude, the last words on, I think, an important aspect in the active building EPC thing is the aspect of how to guarantee demand response performance in such an EPC context. This is something that we're still working on. It's also something that we definitely would like to discuss with, say, more experts in the field. What we are proposing in a nutshell is to use a performance and guarantee verification process that is fully in line with the IPMVP. What we must do for that is to come up with new, relevant, and clear so-called routine and non-routine adjustments, specifically related to the demand response valorization performance. We are also aware of the fact that without specific measures, there's a high risk to overestimate the demand response valorization results, because implicitly the MPC assumes perfect forecasts, perfect models, and perfect control, which in the operational case, of course, will not be the case. For that reason, we are extending the framework in a manner that it allows us to quantify and analyze the impact of what we call the so-called not all-knowingness. And thirdly and finally, we think that giving any guarantees will be extremely different if the models and algorithms that are used to predict performance are different from those that are used in the operational phase in the BAMS itself. For instance, if they would be provided by different actors, there would be no accountability on either side of them. So this is something that needs to be further analyzed and verified with experts in the fields, and it relates specifically also to the role that the ESCO would play in the operational phase in such demand response EPC context. This brings me to the end of the presentation. The floor is open for questions or comments, unless if we decide to just take all of them at the end after all presentations. Thank you.
I guess now I'll give the floor to Jose Costa. Will moderate the following panel. And we have also another guest which will participate only by audio. But Jose, go ahead, please.
Here, okay, perfect. So I will then have the pleasure to moderate a panel with these two honored guests that you can see here. Both of them owners of vast expertise in the domain of the energy efficiency in buildings that we have been discussing today. And just to introduce, as you have been hearing throughout the session, we have a building stock that remains rather energy intensive or inefficient or energy hungry, like Chris said. And it's then evident that buildings must be the target of a large set of actions in order to make them more sustainable. This should be accomplished while buildings are also being asked to be more responsive or more flexible or more smart. More smart to both their users and their surrounding city facilities, such as the mobility or even the electrical distribution grid. The European Union, a place with a building renovation rate ranging from 0.4 to 1.2%, depends a lot on how we tackle this challenge in order to comply with the climate goals that were defined. Our ambition, as discussed today as well, to be climate neutral by 2015, needs a renovation wave, so as determined in the Green Deal. For that to happen, the European Commission estimated that this renovation rate is at least to double by 2030. And at the same time, this needs to be affordable. So not forget that nearly 34 million Europeans are today unable to keep their homes heated. The executive VP for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, pronounced 2 weeks ago the following words. So quoting, "We want everyone in Europe to have a home they can light, eat, or cool without breaking the bank or breaking the planet." So powerful stuff. We can see that the renovation wave is not only a reply to low energy efficiency in buildings, but it's also a reaction to our socioeconomic ambition, a reaction to COVID-19 and the enhanced role of our homes as a nuclear point for our daily life and work, and the reaction to poverty as well. All right, so allow me to introduce now our guests while they join me in this digital stage, starting with Chris Kuyert, AmBIENCe coordinator, to whom we start to apologize for not introducing him before, but please consider this as an introduction with retroactive effects. So Chris is the research activity leader at V2, Energyville. Chris is leading the research activities that are focusing on the modeling of buildings and district level flexibility with respect to energy consumption. Moreover, Chris is also leading the sub-program on prosumer engagement through digitalization and ICT of the European Energy Research Alliance. Hi, Chris, again.
Hi, thank you.
Our second guest, Lieven van Stralen, senior partner and senior EPC consultant at AmBIENCe, our partners in AmBIENCe, and the president of BELESCO, the Belgian ESCO Association, since 2010. Before joining AmBIENCe, Lieven was for 6 years the CEO of FEDESCO, the Belgian Federal Energy Services Company. Lieven has a strong expertise on energy performance contracting, ESCO models, and third-party financing for the public and the private sector. Hello, Lieven. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, let's start with you, Lieven. We are more used to look at innovation from a technological perspective, but it's true that a lot is being done also in the financial domain. So growing attention is being provided to green financing mechanisms, since the Green Deal itself brings significant investment needs. Question being, which novel business models are emerging that could de-risk a still risky investment to underpin the renovation wave, and how to make this wave just and inclusive?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for this quite broad question, of course, because when we talk about financing, we talk about de-risking, there are several aspects to look at. First of all, one of the things that I see, and I think it is in line with what has also been discussed before, that is an increasing, let's say, an increase in ambition level of energy efficiency. Where a number of years ago, we talked about energy efficiency as, okay, let's try to replace the boiler and have less, lower costs, or maybe even lower CO2 emissions, and several other measures, doing relighting and so on. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen really a move towards more energetic renovation. It's not just see the energy efficiency as individual measures, as a sum of measures, but see them in the light of, okay, how can we make this building more energy efficient overall and renovate the building with that perspective. What we also seen in the last couple of years is a move towards deeper renovation and deep energy retrofits, not just energy retrofits, but deep energy retrofits, and what we also sometimes call comprehensive refurbishments. And what we see now happening, of course, since more recently, and this will take, of course, time, but also driven by the Green Deal, is to move towards climate neutral renovation. It's not just say we have to do a deep energy renovation, but it has to be eventually be inscribed in the 2050 objectives. And again, we will not reach there from day one. This will require even strategies that allow for a phased approach, but eventually that's where we are going, and that's what we see on the horizon. So that's the first aspect. If you then translate that to the financing challenge, that means, of course, that the financing requirements are becoming much bigger than they were a couple of years ago. Of course, also the opportunity if you have interesting financing solutions. But if you look at the deep renovations, payback times go up. We used to do EPC contracts of 5 years. Now we're doing and maybe 10 years. Now we're doing contracts of 15 years, and we are working on the contracts that may be 25 years, 20 or 25 years. Knowing that if you want to do a climate neutral renovation or even a very thorough deep renovation, the payback time itself may even be 30 or 40 years. So that's the context in which we have to look at financing, and we see financing mechanisms. So we see those financing mechanisms at the European level. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but there is under the before was the EC framework, which will now become the InvestEU framework. There are, for example, there's work going on investment platforms. How can you renovate not one building, but how can you renovate at a large scale, do a renovation program in hundreds of buildings, and how to support that? Investment platforms is one of the solutions. Why? Because they not only bring together all of the building blocks of the technical innovation and of the financing, but for example, the European Investment Bank has a mechanism to guarantee those investments, basically, if they are realized under such an investment platform. And it brings me also to the aspect of de-risking. One of the ways to de-risk investments for the investors is, of course, on one hand, the performance risk. That's why we look at EPC and we implement EPC, energy performance contracts, and new models. That's also the reason why at some stage we use additional guarantees. We also see an evolution in different sectors for financing, and maybe we can talk about that later when we talk about new business models. For example, in Belgium, but it's not necessarily different in other countries. Up till recently, most of the projects were in the public sector, and there were some projects in the private sector. Today, we see EPCs emerging, for example, in multi-apartment buildings and multi-apartment dwellings with co-owners, with 50 co-owners. That's a whole different complexity to manage that decision process and to manage such a project. But also from a financing point of view, a traditional bank will only finance energy efficiency investment for an apartment renovation for 10 years, maybe 15 years. If we need to go to 20 years, the bank today doesn't have a solution to finance that, or at least not a standard solution. So we will be working on, can we have like a guarantee fund so that the bank can make that longer term loan without necessarily increasing or having necessarily a mortgage on that additional apartment. And then not have a single one, but a solution, a structural solution for the 50 apartments where the co-owners, the co-owner association is basically taking on the loan. So these are various things that we see happening. in terms of new business schemes, but related to new financing. Social housing is one. Again, I will try to wrap up my answer, but also in social housing and some of the concepts that we're working on in AmBIENCe and that Chris has told about certainly are also applicable in social housing. We are even doing a pilot project in Belgium on that, using flexibility, using maybe even batteries at the neighborhood level. Then again, you have a new question: how are you going to finance that type of solution? Knowing, for example, I will maybe talk about it later, knowing that the social tenant is benefiting from the savings, whereas the social housing company is not, but they have to invest. So I don't know if that is a first answer to your question. Many things happening, de-risking certainly an issue, working on guarantee schemes, but overall increase in ambition level, and therefore an increase in new financing solutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Leuven. So we got to know the concept of climate neutral renovation, which implies longer payback costs, but this new approach is being underpinned not only by the borrowers, but also the lenders that are also innovating on this. Moving to Chris, and also a bit linked with the large-scale renovation that Leuven was discussing, or even the multifamiliar apartments. Normally, the APC is signed between the owner of one building and the ESCO, as we have seen today. Despite that, AmBIENCe intends to explore as well the extension of these EPCs to clusters of active buildings, so buildings which can be managed and those flexibility can be activated. The question is, why so? Why this strategy, and which challenges can emerge or are already emerging from this extension?
Yeah. Okay. So I think extending the concept of performance guarantees from a single building to what we call here clusters of buildings, I think is a way to also for the ESCO to reduce the risks. Yeah, the risk of guarantees that maybe will not be met. If you have, for instance, guaranteed savings contract type, because by increasing the pool of buildings, you say it's well possible that although there are buildings where the performance is not met, yeah, and where if you would look at it at an individual building, there would have to be penalties to be paid. If you have a pool of buildings, this may be compensated by other buildings that maybe, if you're lucky, have a higher than, say, guaranteed performance. Yeah, and this way, kind of the risk is reduced, and it may also be possible then for the ESCO, I think, to maybe come with more interesting contracts and to be more competitive. Yeah, if you can pool some of these things. Next to that, I can imagine that purely looking at it from the cost and the investment side, yeah, that there can be benefits related for the ESCO and then translated to the beneficiaries related to economy of scale. Because it's very likely that, let's say, buying, installing, and maintaining a single large PV installation or a single large battery that is shared is probably cheaper than if you have to do the same thing for many small PV installations and many small batteries. Yeah? So there's an economy of scale advantage. Now, one of the challenges there, in my opinion, comes with the fact that you have to have a strategy on how to define and how to agree on how this the shared infrastructure, this shared PV, for instance, or shared batteries is used. And yeah, so does everybody have like a fixed own share? Yeah, let's say if there are 10 buildings or building owners, each say owning 10% of the PV generation and 10% of the battery storage, it was an equal cost sharing? Or would you come up with more sophisticated, what you could call asset virtualization approaches, where there's not like a fixed fixed allocation of a certain share to a certain building, but it can be more dynamic and vary in time, say, depending on the individual needs and plans and forecasts of the individual buildings. Yeah. So let's say if one building would not need its PV generation in the next hour, yeah, why would you not temporarily increase the share of somebody else so he can use that in an effective manner for his demand response related activities, yeah, instead of letting it be unused. So actually what we are then talking about is a coordinated control of a coordination between buildings, probably, well, most likely based on models and forecasts, which in a way also already makes it more complicated. And I think this comes very close to the concept of what we would call nowadays energy communities, yeah? At least from the technological point of view about what needs to be done. Yeah? That being said, this means that such coordination not only is a way to make more effective use of shared assets in such a clustered EPC approach, but that you can also go one step further and say also coordinate the consumption, for instance, of each of the buildings in a more active manner, let's say to avoid peaks. Yeah. So this brings it even much closer to an energy community type of approach. Then maybe one more thing is that, of course, if you pool multiple buildings, yeah, you have a larger pool of flexibility. This means, yeah, it gives you more room for optimizations for active control. Yeah. So this means you can increase the demand response valorization potential, which is again a way to say improve the business case of the clustered EPC approach. And also, of course, if you pool flexibility, this means you can reach a certain level of scale. That also makes it easier to, let's say, offer your flexibility to grid or market stakeholders. Yeah, which makes again there you tap into another source of demand response valorization. Yeah? So I think, yeah, that kind of, I think, explains both the opportunities, but also the challenges and complexities that I see in this EPC for clustered buildings. Yeah, and of course, next to that, I think Lieven very well explained the specific challenges related to to contractual and business model aspects. Yeah, if you need to have a contract with multiple beneficiaries. Yeah. That introduces complexity on its own, but as said, Lieven explained that well.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. So it seems that we have here a win-win situation. We reduce the costs for ESCOs and we leverage the economies of scale. Now, navigating a bit throughout the questions that we have from the audience, I can see here one for Lieven, which is the following. On a EPC for mitigation of energy poverty, who assumes the high default risk with those clients? And Lieven, if you could speak a bit louder, please. I think the sound was not very good in the first answer.
Sure, I can try to speak a bit louder, but I myself, I did not understand fully the question. I heard something, but can you just slowly repeat it?
Sure. On a EPC for mitigation of energy poverty, who assumes the high default risk with those clients?
Again, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question very well. So, but I think it's more to do with the sound. So, yeah, I understood that they were talking about energy poverty.
True. So I think the scenario is an ESCO, an EPC with some social housing.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, with that comes a risk. So who assumes that high risk towards those clients that may not pay in the end of the day?
Yeah, the issue that's not specific to EPC, that is specific to realizing energy efficiency, of course, is that if the social housing company is investing as an owner of those social houses, then of course the beneficiary is the tenant, is the social tenant, the occupant. Who is renting this on a relatively low cost, which is normal. That's also part of the basic way of combating against energy poverty is first of all is to give them a rent that is reasonable and adapted to his situation. But it means that there is really no return on investment for the social housing company, because the social tenant is taking the benefits. Of course, the investment is relatively low. Sorry, the rent is relatively low. The income is also relatively low. The energy consumption is also relatively low. But the cost for renovating those social houses is quite high. So the first thing to do, of course, is to try to increase the effectiveness and the scalability, and that's why renovating a large number of social houses in one project and using the ESCO approach or the EPC approach is the first thing to do, because it's scalable and because the transaction costs do not increase linearly. The second thing is how can you reduce the renovation costs? And that's where projects that maybe some of you have heard of, like Sociale Energiesprong or Stroomversnelling in the Netherlands, and there are some other projects, have focused on how can we renovate those buildings as effectively as possible. And one of the ways is to work, for example, with prefabricated panels built in the workshop that integrate solar panels and that are being installed on site with a crane very quickly. Replace the existing heating then by the heat pumps, and then you come into the story that Chris has been telling, electrification of heat, standardize that, and then potentially adding also the demand response and the flexibility. So it's basically get as many energy savings and as many as CO2 savings with the lowest investment by highly standardizing the renovation process at a large scale. But then there's still the issue that even that lower investment, there is no return on investment for the social housing company. And so where people then look at, and the social housing companies in Belgium, we work together with the umbrella organization to see, okay, can we now have that social tenants contribute to some extent? That can be as much as that they pay for the total energy savings that are being guaranteed. That's their contribution. So for the tenant, it becomes budget neutral. In Belgium, we look more at solving this split incentive, if you want, between tenant and social housing owners by linking the rent to the energy performance of the building. So before, for example, before the renovation, they would be paying, I don't know, 400 euros per month. And after the renovation, the energy label has increased from, let's say, F to B, or even to A, or even to A+. And then the rent is increased by, for example, 120 euros, knowing that the real energy saving that he is maybe 180 euros per month. It can be as much as what they call zero on the meter, almost virtually no consumption. So that's the way how you basically also increase comfort and try to combine getting the new buildings in line with the European objectives, giving some money back and giving some kind of a business case. Not 100% of the investment, but partially is paid from the savings. And whereas the social tenant will pay less for his bill, but still has some kind of a contribution, which will also motivate him, of course, to be conscious about the remaining energy consumption. And so it's tackling energy poverty, combining them basically with climate policy. I'm not sure if that's the answer to the question, if that was exactly the question, but that's how we deal, for example, with energy poverty in those social houses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much, Vivian. And now, since we are already running a bit late, we have one more question to Chris, whom I will ask to be very brief, Liz, which is that in AmBIENCe, we have also a focus in non-energy benefits. So more concretely, its integration with energy services in the overall EPC proposal. So the question is, why do you consider this important for an energy services company, such as EDP Commercial, for instance? And if you foresee this as a trend for the future, this integration?
Yeah, I'll try to answer brief on this. I hope you still hear me because it's raining cats and dogs here.
We do.
So I think for an ESCO, I think today it may be even easier, I think, to offer non-energy services than energy services. The reason being that many people may be reluctant to allow, let's say, the control of flexibility. So to have somebody taking ownership over that, or somebody collecting information that's needed to do so. Yeah. So there may be, say, many concerns related to privacy and security. Yeah. Next, yeah, on top of the fear of losing comfort that always comes when people realize that flexibility is used to achieve a certain goal. Yeah, I mean it gives them a sense of being less in control and being less secure about their comfort. But we do see that there's a kind of a high pickup of all types of IoT related equipment in buildings. Yeah, sensors, meters, things you can control remotely, switches and things like that. Yeah, and very often these are introduced not because of energy reasons, but because of other reasons. Yeah, people just like it's fun to play with it. They have the sense that it improves their comfort. It gives them more security, let's say presence detection and things like that, whether windows are open and closed. And they may be more willing to do certain investments in such IoT infrastructure for non-energy related services than for energy related services. Yeah. So for an ESCO, it may be kind of good strategy to first try to get a presence in the building, offering these non-energy services, and then, yeah, also as the demand response business cases improve, and they will improve as we argued, yeah, then yeah, have already kind of a presence in the building and offer on top of the first non-energy services, yeah, this extra package of energy related services. Yeah. So that's I think, or at least from my view, I look at the kind of the balance between these non-energy and energy related services. Yeah. So there's kind of common infrastructure they need, and it may be easier to enter via the non-energy services side and later then add energy services in the second stage.
Okay, so increasing trust and enlarge the portfolio. Thank you very much, Chris. It was clear. So wrapping up, I would just like to conclude on a more domestic note, because here in Portugal, it was said in a recent study that the thermal discomfort, the people feel thermal discomfort throughout more than 90% of the year, with exception to some family buildings constructed after 2016. So the government is already replying to this, making the energy transition a priority, with some funds allocated to this domain in the recovery and resiliency plan. But innovation for sure will play a crucial role here as well. And projects as AmBIENCe can help us to the great leap forward that we need to make in Portugal. And here at EDP New, we are happy to contribute to this journey, and for sure we'll have more projects to present to you. So thank you very much, Levan and Chris, for the insightful participation, and thank you all the attendees for your interaction. Alex, don't know if you want to close. From our side, that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, José, and thank all the guests, Chris and Levan, and my colleagues, Ricardo, both Ricardos and José also, and most of all the participants and the audience that was here today. And just to remind you that so we will have a next session in 2 weeks, and the subject will be smart grids and with a focus on a smart grid project. So thank you again, and see you next time. Bye bye.